Marion County, Florida, 1935. Federal agents, their weapons drawn, surrounded a cozy lakeside home. Inside was one of the most notorious gangsters of his day, Fred Barker, and his mother, Kate. A gunfight broke out, hundreds of bullets were fired, and both Fred and his mother were killed. The FBI made clear the mother was not an innocent bystander. They called her, quote, a mean, vicious beast of prey, unquote. But is that true? Or was it a lie to cover up for Ma Barker's murder? It's The History of Murder, and I'm your host, Clare O'Donoghue. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called this gang, quote, the most vicious, cold-blooded crew of murderers, kidnappers, and robbers in recent memory, unquote. They were the Barker brothers and their partners in crime. In their prime, the gang boasted 25 members and made off with over $3 million in loot, about $75 million in today's dollars. And the person whom the feds called the group's mastermind was the sharp-nosed, curly-haired, matronly-looking Kate Barker. Wayne Hughes is a tour guide at the Bradford Ma Barker House in Florida.
I would say she was uneducated, but she was very strong personality toward her boys and in the mother part of her life. Very strong mother, almost abrasive mother.
But to those who knew and worked with the gang, Ma was just a loving mother who staunchly supported her sons no matter what they did or who they did it to. Extremely permissive parent? Yes. Queen of the crooks? Well, maybe not. Harvey Bailey was considered the dean of American bank robbers. He was interviewed in prison once and they asked him, did Ma Barker ever help plan these robberies or kidnappings?
Before we continue, please remember to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. It will help us continue to make new content. Now, back to the story.
Ma Barker was born Arizona Donnie Clark in Ash Grove, Missouri on October 8, 1873. Growing up poor with an abusive alcoholic father and a submissive doormat of a mother, young Ari longed for escape and a life of luxury. She loved reading stories about famous Western outlaws like Jesse James and the Dalton Gang. As an 8-year-old, she even hiked nearly 50 miles to catch a glimpse of James when he passed through her state. On September 4, 1892, just shy of her 19th birthday, Ari married a local farmer named George Barker.
George was 14 years older than Ma at the time they got married. And so I think he was trying to be a father figure as best he could, but he was not the most ambitious guy.
George and Ari settled in Aurora, Missouri, and had 4 boys, Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, known as Doc, and Fred. By the time Fred was born in 1902, Ari retired her first name and began calling herself Kate. With a big family to support, George juggled a series of low-skilled jobs, but he struggled to keep the bills paid and food on the table. Kate, who had grown into a domineering, whiskey-chugging wife, resented her husband's inability to provide. But her boys were her pride and joy. So when they started skipping school or stealing to bring home extra cash, Ma didn't bat an eyelash. Especially since, in her view, George was failing the family.
I don't think the boys were good at sitting home and waiting for Dad to figure out these problems. No money, no food. So they took it into their own hands. And Ma was good with it.
The Barker kids earned a reputation as rowdy, barely literate troublemakers. The neighbors called them sons of Satan. But to Kate, they were her beloved boys. She apparently once said,
if the good people of this town don't like my boys, then the good people know what they can do.
Because of the boys' lawlessness, the family was forced out of Aurora and settled in a town 53 miles away. There, Herman and Lloyd started their first gang. The teens picked pockets and extorted money from frightened shopkeepers. But whenever they were caught, their aggressive Ma would do her best to get them off.
Even when they were arrested, she went to the city hall and defended them and carried on, ran in a rave to get them out of jail. So I don't believe they did anything wrong in Ma's eyes.
Ma would put on theatrical performances for local law enforcement. She'd cry and plead for her boys. Then she'd yell about official corruption and demand to see solid evidence of her son's offenses. She'd also accuse the cops of using her kids as scapegoats for their own inability to curb crime. Exhausted by her tirades, the authorities began to turn a blind eye to the boys' antics. But in 1915, things took a more serious turn. The family had by then settled in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the boys fell in with a notorious local gang.
They were involved in the Central Park gang. They hung out with some other guys who grew up to be gangsters, Harvey Bailey and Harry Campbell.
These budding young gangsters peddled phony newspaper subscriptions, stole cars, and robbed stores. When Herman, Lloyd, and a few others were arrested in Joplin, Missouri, Ma swooped in to harangue the police.
Lies! All lies! You're all lying about my boys!
But while the Joplin cops gave in to Ma and released the boys, others weren't so easily persuaded. On August 13, 1916, Herman was arrested in Springfield for robbing a jewelry store and sentenced to 4 years. He escaped and hitchhiked to Montana using the alias Bert Lavender, where he was caught again for burglary and sent to prison. Arthur was arrested and charged with car theft in July of 1918. It seemed that one by one, the brothers were being pinched by the law. But the youngest, Fred, managed to stay on the outside and continue his criminal ways.
I think Freddie was a very arrogant, cocky, cold-blooded kid growing up with the Central Park gang. He kind of took over the lead of that gang and just went from there. He graduated from there to bigger crimes and more robberies, more money.
But with the U.S. in the midst of World War I, one Barker boy tried to follow a different path.
Lloyd decides to go straight. He enlists in the Army. He serves through World War I, gets out with an honorable discharge, and then decides to try his luck at robbing the payroll of the U.S. mail. He is captured and sentenced to 25 years in the Leavenworth Federal Prison.
In 1920, Arthur Doc Barker, freed from the car theft charge, shot and killed a night watchman while committing a robbery. He was given a life sentence. 5 years later, Fred was captured and convicted for another crime and sentenced to 5 to 10 years in the Kansas State Prison. That left Herman as the only brother not behind bars. Continuing the family business, in August of 1929, Herman, with several others, robbed the Newton Crystal Ice Plant in Kansas. But he made a critical mistake.
He was pulled over. Him and two other men were pulled over for speeding by two motorcycle policemen. An officer by the name of Marshall approached the driver's side of the car, and when he did, Herman pulled out a gun, shot the officer in the head. According to the Joplin Journal newspaper, one of the bullets went through his 4 front teeth, and the officer was dead. An officer by the name of Frank Bush on the passenger side of the car opened fire, shot into the car. He wounded Herman severely. Herman still had enough left to take off in the car, but he crashed straight up the road in a parking lot of a 24-hour diner. And as people gathered around the scene, he took his gun out, and again, according to the Joplin Journal, said, "Tell my mother I'm sorry," and he committed suicide rather than be taken alive.
With his oldest son dead, George was racked with grief. He decided he'd had enough. While some say Ma kicked him out, others maintain he chose to leave. Either way, George Barker walked away from his wife and sons for good.
He left Ma in 1927, and he said that Ma never let him discipline the boys. And at this point, I've got 1 dead, 3 in jail, and Ma never let me discipline the boys. I couldn't take it anymore.
On her own and grieving for Herman, a middle-aged Ma started a relationship with 69-year-old Arthur Dunlop. But he turned out to be an underachieving, jobless alcoholic. So Ma, lonely for her boys, began a relentless campaign to get them released. While she harassed prison guards and parole boards, Fred, still in prison in Kansas, forged a friendship with another inmate, Alvin Karpus.
He was born in Canada. His name was Alvin Karpowitz. And when they came to the States, if Alvin Karpowitz hadn't hooked up with Freddie Barker, you wouldn't even know that name today. I think he would have been in the category with these gangsters who nobody's heard of. But I think he was a great straight man to Freddie Barker. But I don't think Karpowitz was a killer at all. I don't think he killed anybody that I know of.
Ma eventually wore down the authorities and was able to get Fred out on parole in March of 1931. Karpowitz was released a few months later. Ma took to him immediately, viewing him as her newly adopted son. Once on the outside, Fred and Alvin started what would soon be called the Barker-Karpowitz gang. They recruited other thugs and resumed their old ways, robbing stores and banks.
Karpowitz later wrote in his autobiography what a natural he was when it came to being a gangster.
My profession was robbing banks, knocking off payrolls. I was good at it. In another set of circumstances, I might have turned out to be a top lawyer or a big-time businessman, or made it at any high position that demanded brains and style and a cool, hard way of handling yourself.
But in December 1931, the gang faced a problem. While trying to avoid arrest after a robbery, Fred and Karpowitz killed Missouri Sheriff C. Roy Kelly. Law enforcement offered a reward of $500 for each fugitive and $100 for the location of Arthur Dunlop and, quote, Old Lady Barker, unquote.
It was the first and last time Ma's name was ever officially implicated in the gang's activities. They fled to St. Paul, Minnesota.
St. Paul was a haven for gangsters. There was a thing up there called the Big John O'Connor Agreement, which basically said any criminal could come into St. Paul. They had to check in at the Green Lantern Tavern. They had to put a little money in the till, and they were not allowed to commit a crime in St. Paul. Big John O'Connor was the police chief, and he said, my town is safe because they know they can't commit a crime. He wouldn't extradite anybody out. John O'Connor said that the reason he did that was because when they put money in the till, he used that money to hire policemen because he didn't have a budget. So the gangsters were hiding out, spending their money in St. Paul, and the money they contributed to the till, the police chief took it to pay for cops, to hire cops to keep the rest of the city safe.
In St. Paul, the Barkers posed as the Anderson family. They rented a house at 1031 South Robert Street from a woman named Helen Hannegraf.
Despite the bounty on their heads, Ma loved her new life in her upscale two-story duplex.
The icebox was always filled with expensive steaks, and the closets were loaded with brand-name clothes. The family attended church socials and community events, often bringing warm dishes to local potlucks. Marion, the granddaughter of Mrs. Hannegraf, remembered the family as, quote, the nicest people, unquote. Later, even after learning who the Andersons really were, she still had fond memories of Ma.
We'd hurry home from St. Matthew's School because if we got home early, we could walk Mrs. Barker's curly-haired bulldog. Whoever got there first, you get a nickel or a candy bar.
While Ma Barker pretty much had an open-door policy for her sons and their friends, some say she didn't like any of her boys' girlfriends, like Fred's paramour, Paula Harmon, or Karpowitz's lover, Doris Delaney. She tried to keep them separated when they were under her roof.
You can rob banks and shoot cops, but no hanky-panky in this house. There's also a story about Ma. Once her husband left her, he also made a comment that she was very friendly, these are his words, very friendly with her womanly assets. Now, except for Arthur Dunlop, I can find nowhere where Ma had a boyfriend, and I don't think she was running around. It's a nice way to say it. I don't think she was running around with different men.
Whether Ma was a loose woman or not has been debated, but was not debated was her homemaking skills, or lack thereof.
I don't think she was ever the housekeeper that a lot of moms are, cooking and cleaning and making sure the beds were made. I don't think that was her role. I think she was pretty much crossword puzzles and jigsaw puzzles, and she loved to go to the movies. So I think that was basically her role. She was just, they brought her along as a front, and she just went for the ride.
In April of 1932, Ma and the gang's happy life in St. Paul took a dramatic turn. Their landlady, Mrs. Hannegraf, saw a story in the magazine True Detective about the Barker gang and recognized the mugshots as her tenants. Someone tipped off the family, who fled before the cops arrived. But Ma and the boys were furious. They believed it was Arthur Dunlop who had blown their cover.
And, of course, he was a drunk, like most of the guys back in that time. And, again, he was in the Green Lantern Tavern. He was running his mouth that he was a big part of the Barker Carpus gang. Well, first of all, you don't talk about the Barker Carpus gang. You don't mention you're in a gang. But he claimed to be running it.
The Barkers decided to ditch their chatty weak link. Dunlop's naked body was soon found in Webster, Wisconsin.
He'd been shot 3 times at point-blank range. Next to his body was a woman's glove, drenched in blood.
It's still an unsolved case. I'm sure it was Freddie Barker that shot him. I don't think Freddie had any qualms about killing any guy that was with his mother.
On September 10th, 1932, Arthur Doc Barker was paroled. He joined Ma and the gang who had relocated to another Minnesota town. The guys continued their crime spree, hitting banks throughout the Midwest and shooting whoever got in the way.
They stole more money, robbed more banks, killed more civilians, and killed more cops, police, than all the big-name famous gangsters combined. So, yeah, they made a lot of money. What they did with it, I don't know. It's got to be on booze and women. I don't know what else you do with all that money back in those days. It's estimated $3.5 million they stole in their robberies and kidnappings.
As their infamy grew, so did the list of thieves and thugs who joined the gang, though many signed on as freelancers, just doing 1 or 2 jobs.
Most of these people just passed through the gang over its 4-year lifespan.
By 1933, although the gang had been wildly successful, the Barker boys and Alvin Karpis began to rethink their careers.
Bank robberies and holdups were becoming extremely risky. The cops were getting dangerously close to nabbing them and sometimes did capture a few of their associates during escapes. Plus, with the Depression on, many banks were closing and some had little cash on hand. But there was one crime that was capturing the nation's attention and also sparked the imagination of the gang. It was the kidnapping of American hero Charles Lindbergh's baby.
That was so monumental in this country. You can go online and find letters that people wrote to Lindberghs saying, I've got 4 children, I'll give you 1. They were willing to give it their kids.
Lindbergh's infant son disappeared from his crib in March of 1932. Ransom notes were sent and $50,000 was paid out before the child's body was found. It would take until 1935 before Bruno Hauptmann would be convicted and sentenced to death.
During the years that the story stayed in the headlines, the idea of kidnapping for ransom kind of took off in the criminal class.
So it was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping which triggered kidnapping in this country. There were a number of them. A man named John Factor, I don't know if you ever heard that one. He was kidnapped because his brother was Max Factor. They tried to extort him for money.
Kidnapping appealed to the Barker Karpis gang, and when Fred heard about one that some of Al Capone's old friends were planning, he wanted in. The problem was the target of the kidnapping was William Ham, the president of Ham Brewing Company in St. Paul, Minnesota, and committing such a high-profile crime in a town that was a gangster haven would break the Big John O'Connor agreement, the agreement that kept gangsters in St. Paul safe from the law as long as they didn't break it there.
Alvin Karpis tried to talk Freddie and Doc Barker out of it, but Freddie was arrogant enough that he thought he could get away with it. I think Freddie was so cocky and arrogant that when he made that decision, he was convinced it was the right thing to kidnap William Ham up in St. Paul, Minnesota.
On June 15, 1933, Ham was abducted while leaving his office. He was taken to Wisconsin, where he was made to sign 4 ransom notes. The price for his freedom was $100,000. The money was delivered a few days later, and Ham was released. But what the gang didn't know was that federal agents were developing a new technique called the silver nitrate method. It would later be called latent fingerprint identification. Scientists understood that fingerprints usually contain perspiration chock full of sodium chloride, in other words, salt. By painting their ransom notes with silver nitrate, the salty perspiration would chemically react and make unseen fingerprints clearly visible. Using this method, the feds found the fingerprints of Doc, Karpis, and another member on the Ham ransom notes. It was the first time this technique was successfully used. Suddenly, the Barker-Karpus gang was on the federal government's radar.
I don't believe the Barkers actually hit the scale until they kidnapped William Ham back in 1933, because they passed the Lindbergh Law, or the federal kidnapping law, because up until then, the feds couldn't get involved in the gangsters because robbing a bank wasn't a federal crime. The only federal crime robbing a bank was if you worked at the bank. If you worked there, they charged you with federal if you were stealing from your employer. But up until then, the feds weren't getting involved.
But by now, the feds were involved since the gang had taken up kidnapping. Their next target was banker Edward Bremer, who came from one of the wealthiest families in St. Paul. On January 17, 1934, after dropping off his daughter at school, Bremer was accosted in his car while waiting at a red light.
Karpus and Arthur got out of their car, shoved him down into the passenger side of the front, and pushed him down and drove off with him. Edward Bremer was a lot more of a problem, according to them, than William Ham. William Ham just sat there, did what he was told to do. Bremer fought him tooth and nail. So they were kind of glad to get rid of him.
But they couldn't get rid of him right away, because the ransom they demanded was twice what they'd gotten before. Now the price was $200,000, nearly $5 million now, which gave Bremer's father some reservations.
His father wasn't real keen about giving out that money. His father was a real stickler. He did not want to pay the ransom, so he negotiated back and forth for a while.
President Franklin Roosevelt took an active interest in this case, saying that the kidnappers had perpetrated, quote, an attack on all we hold dear, unquote. He'd even talked about the scourge of gangsters and kidnappers in his 1934 State of the Union address.
And in one of Roosevelt's fireside chats, he mentioned this kidnapping and said he was going to do everything he can to get Bremer back alive. And he got on J. Edgar Hoover, and he put the pressure on Hoover, saying, I want this guy back. Bremer was a big donator, donated a lot of money to Roosevelt's campaign.
After 21 days, Bremer's family finally pooled together the money and paid it. On February 16th, he was released. Bremer later described the ordeal to the press.
I must have been struck 15 or 20 times. My eyes became filled with blood, and I was dazed. I was taken out of the car and led some distance where we went downstairs. I was placed in a chair, then they examined my head and washed off the cuts as best as they could. I was then bandaged up and put to bed. They ordered me to behave as they told me, or they would chain me to the bed. Naturally, I acceded to their every wish.
Bremer's kidnapping may have been over, but it was not forgotten. President Roosevelt ordered a manhunt for perpetrators. Bremer himself provided many clues. Investigators caught a break when they found Doc's fingerprint on an empty gas can left along an abduction route. Now the feds were hot on the trail of the Barkers. As the leader of the gang, Alvin Karpus was declared public enemy number one. Fred and Karpus went to a surgeon in Chicago who was well known for helping gangsters. He tried to alter the men's appearance. Karpus did get his fingerprints shaved off, but the doctor botched on Fred's face, leaving scars but no visible difference. As retribution, the doctor's body was later found near Lake Erie, and the gang went on the run.
They knew what the flying squad, that was the group of feds that were coming to chase them. They called them the flying squad. They knew the flying squad was on the move, so they decided to split up. Alvin, Karpus, and Dolores go to Cuba. Ma and Freddie and Harry Campbell, a lifelong friend, go to Miami. So they moved in here as best we can figure. The closest date we can figure is November 9th, 1934.
Once Ma and Fred moved to Florida, they settled into a rented home near Lake Weir in the town of Ocklawaha. Doc and his girlfriend got an apartment in Chicago. Once again, the Barkers, especially Ma, became known as kind and friendly residents.
People said that her and Freddie ingratiated themselves to the neighborhood, and except for going out on the lake at midnight shooting their machine guns, they said they were terrific neighbors. And I think, there's all kinds of records of Ma going out, paying kids $2 to mow the lawn when kids were getting a dime, and always having cookies and lemonade for the neighbors.
On January 8, 1935, federal agents ambushed Doc and his girlfriend, Mildred Cullman, near their Chicago apartment on Surf Street.
His famous line was, when the feds grabbed him in Chicago, they said to him, "What's your name?" He said, "You guys know who I am." And Agent Muzzy said to him, "Doc, where's your gun?" And he said, "Home. Isn't that a hell of a place when I need it right now?"
During a search of Doc's apartment, the feds, led by Agent Earl Connolly, struck gold. They found some clues they believed would lead them right to the whereabouts of Fred and Ma Barker.
He found the map of Florida with Central Florida circled that Freddie had sent him. It didn't mention any towns or names, just the whole center of Florida circled. They found the letter, the famous letter about Gator Joe. Fred had written a letter to his brother, again, not mentioning any towns or cities, talking about this gator, 16, 17-foot gator that they were trying to shoot for a trophy and meat. But eventually the gator was killed, and whoever did kill it cut its paw off, and it's on display.
Some clever detective work led investigators to the Lake Weir area to search for the Barkers. And contrary to local lore, Agent Connolly made it clear it was not Gator Joe that brought them there.
One of the people asked him, did knowing about this gator, was that a big help, knowing this huge gator on this lake? And he said, well, coming out of Chicago, I thought this was going to be a big help until I got in Florida, and I found out every town in Florida has a lake and a gator named Joe. When the feds came in town, they were looking for Ma and Freddie, Freddie and the gang. They went to the postmaster. The postmaster said, the only people new in town that I know of are the Blackburns. That was an alias that the Barkers used. And he said, they get a newspaper every day from Chicago. That's the only mail they get. But if you want to verify anything, why don't you go talk to Mr. Barber?
By a strange stroke of luck, Mr. Barber was a local who'd recently retired from his job as a federal prison guard at Leavenworth, the same prison where Lloyd Barker was housed.
Well, they go in there and he identifies the picture of Ma Barker as the mother of Lloyd Barker, who's doing the 25 years for trying to rob the payroll of the U.S. mail. So with the information the postmaster said about the Blackburns, a newspaper from Chicago, him identifying Ma Barker, the feds had all they needed.
It was a very experienced team of agents that closed in on the Barkers. They had taken down a lot of famous gangsters. Agent Thomas McDade had been involved in the killing of Babyface Nelson. Agent Charles Winstead, a skilled sharpshooter, had fired the fatal shots that killed John Dillinger. Agent Sam McKee had been part of the team that killed Pretty Boy Floyd. And on the early morning of January 16, 1935, they arrived at the house on Lake Weir, where Ma and Fred were staying.
Well, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. These 14 men, again called the Flying Squad, they surround the house. Agent Connolly waited until the sun came up. Once he thought it was light enough, he calls out for them to surrender. They don't. As he starts to back up, the woman yells, "What are you going to do?" Agent Connolly hears that. He signals for the tear gas. The agents shoot and miss the windows. They hit the side of the house. As soon as the tear gas made its appearance, the tear gas starts coming out of the upstairs southwest windows, shooting down at the three agents in the front. Gunfire starts coming out of the downstairs southwest window simultaneous. Ma Barker had to be shooting a gun. There's only two people in the house. This gunfire keeps going. Now it starts to go around the house. Somebody starts running around the house, shooting out of every window, trying to make it look like there's more than two people in the house. This goes on for about an hour and 20 minutes.
Most reports about the famous shootout say it lasted 4 to 5 hours. They say it was the longest shootout in FBI history. There's just one problem with that.
It wasn't the FBI, it was the DOI, Division of Investigation. The FBI became official January 1st, 1936. This shootout was January 16th, 1935. So almost a year before they became the FBI. It was really a 2-hour shootout and a 3-hour standoff. And 2,000 rounds, I think that was the number thrown out when they were trying to sell the house. But based on Agent Stapleton's report that he did his inventory, He counted 641 bullets. That's the only count that I know of that was taken inside the house after the shooting. Agent Connolly estimated 250 bullets shot out. So you're looking at a total of about 891 bullets, give or take a few.
At about 20 minutes to 9, suddenly everything stopped. There was no more gunfire, just silence. The shootout was over. Agents first sent Willie Woodbury, a local handyman, inside to see if the Barkers were still alive. Woodbury, wearing a bulletproof vest, walked in alone. He found Ma and Fred Barker. Both were dead.
Freddie Barker was face down on top of a blue steel Colt revolver. It was fully loaded but jammed, would not shoot. Kate Barker's body was removed from the scene.
The killings made front-page news, and the legend of the Barker shootout took off.
They were put on display for 30 days, and for 30 days there was a nonstop line of people to view the bodies. After the 30 days, Ma and Freddie were put on ice. They stayed in the morgue in Pyle's funeral home for 9 months until George Barker, Ma's legal husband, could come east, get the bodies. Ma and Freddie were found with 14 $1,000 bills. George, after all the paperwork and expenses, ended up with about $1,700. He used that money to take Ma and Freddie back to Welch, Oklahoma, where they're buried in the Williams Timber Hill Cemetery.
George would spend the rest of his life working in an Oklahoma gas station. He died at the age of 81 of natural causes. After Ma and Fred's death, the other gang members were rounded up one by one.
Karpis will get apprehended about a year later, May 1st, 1936, in New Orleans. And of course, there's always that controversy about J. Edgar Hoover arresting him personally. I think he was hell-bent on getting Karpis. Karpis, at that point now, he's robbing trains and post office. So it was the postal police and the locomotive police or train police who pinned him down and then got a hold of the FBI because they thought politically it'd be better if the FBI makes the arrest. So that's why Hoover came down and did it.
Just like with the Barker shootout, a legendary story emerged about the arrest of Alvin Karpis. Apparently, when the feds went to arrest him, there was no one with handcuffs around. So an agent named Buchanan offered to use his necktie to tie the suspect's hands.
Well, it got out as the Buchanan handcuffs or the Buchanan necktie event or affair. And later, after reading his son's diary, what happened was J. Edgar Hoover wanted the tie for the FBI Hall of Fame in Washington, and Buchanan was always kidding him about he wouldn't send it to him. They were good friends, like fishing buddies, after he retired. But he later decided to send him the tie. So he boxed it up, took it into the post office in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and mailed it to J. Edgar Hoover. The tie has never been seen again.
After Arthur Doc Barker was arrested in Chicago, he was convicted of the Bremer kidnapping and sent to a new prison called Alcatraz.
He was in Alcatraz 4 years and 5 days. Friday the 13th, January 1939, him and 4 other men attempted the first night escape at Alcatraz.
Prison snipers shot at Doc, who tried to flee on a makeshift raft. He was hit twice. He was taken to the prison hospital where he died. His final words reportedly were, quote, "I'm all shot to hell. I was a fool to try it," unquote. Alvin Karpis also spent some time in Alcatraz. In fact, he spent 33 years in various prisons before he was released in 1969.
He was immediately deported out of this country back to Canada. That did not work out for him. So he moves to, I think it's called Torlissimo, Spain. He moves to Spain. He dies there 10 years later, 1979, at the age of 72. His death is officially listed as accidental overdose of sleeping pills. After Karpis died, he was buried in Malaga, Spain. He was buried in a cemetery that required you to keep a lease on your plot. 20 years after he was buried, May 26, 1999, with nobody to pay the rent on his plot, Alvin Karpis's remains were disinterred from the grave, taken out into the mountains, and dumped in a pit where they put those that don't pay the bills.
Lloyd Barker, who had not been part of the gang during its heyday because he had been in prison, finally was released in 1939.
The Federal Bureau of Prisons came to Lloyd and said, "You're free to go. You've been a good boy, no incident reports, and at this point, your mother's dead, your 3 brothers are dead, there's no crime group left, you're free to go."
Lloyd joined the military once again and served through World War II as a POW camp cook in Fort Custer, Michigan. After his second honorable discharge, he headed to Colorado. He got a job as a short-order cook and married his longtime girlfriend, Jenny, who had 2 kids from a previous marriage. Together, they had 2 more.
And on March 18th, 1949, Lloyd gets up to go to work. This is based on police testimony. He gets up to go to work. Jenny said, "Can you come back home after you get everything set up and take care of the 2 babies today? I don't feel well." Lloyd came home, opened up the front door of the house, and Jenny was standing there with a 12-gauge shotgun and blew most of the left side of his head off. Jenny told the police she thought it was an intruder coming to get her children. Her son, by the previous marriage, when interviewed by the police, said that his mother had planned it. So Jenny Barker was convicted, found guilty, and at the age of 37 was sentenced to the Pueblo, Colorado Insane Asylum, where she dies 37 years later.
Though Kate Barker and the rest of the gang were gone, her reputation and that of the boys continued to grow. Hoover and the FBI especially villainized Ma as the cutthroat head of the most vicious crime group of the gangster era, and movies portrayed her as a ruthless, gun-toting, monstrous mama who was also a criminal genius. Yet those who knew her personally always maintained the FBI portrait was wildly inaccurate and possibly an attempt to cover for the killing of a 61-year-old woman.
A lot of people come on this tour looking at me like I'm crazy when I tell them there's absolutely no proof that she was ever associated with an act of crime. Was she guilty of harboring the fugitives? Yes. Was she guilty of shooting feds at this shootout? I believe she shot at them, yes. But other than that, she was not the leader of any gang.
In his book, Alvin Karpis described her as a combination of both images: an overindulgent mother who did commit a crime, of being a willing accomplice.
The most ridiculous story in the annals of crime is that Ma Barker was the mastermind behind the Karpis-Barker gang. She wasn't a leader of criminals or even a criminal herself. She knew we were criminals, but her participation in our careers was limited to one function. When we traveled together, we moved as a mother and her sons. What could look more innocent?
What do you think about this case? Please comment below. And if you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like and notification buttons, and let us know if there are any cases you'd like us to cover.